Hello, I'm Keith Helston with the Schmidt Music Trombone Shop, back with another mouthpiece review for you. Now, I know the first thing you're thinking is, we're talking about trombones. This is not a trombone. You are correct. This is a trumpet because today I've got a really unique mouthpiece, specifically the Wycliffe Gordon Wybrid mouthpiece from Pickett Brass. So if you're not familiar with Wycliffe Gordon, of course, he's been a force, one of the biggest forces in the jazz trombone world over the past 25 plus years, really. He's been doing some, really innovative stuff. Recently, he's been doing a lot of work with a soprano trombone, and I think even a little bit of trumpet. And so, to help with that, he's designed a hybrid mouthpiece. So this is a mouthpiece with a trombone cup width and trombone rim width, but going down to a trumpet shank in order to allow trombone players to play trumpet without having to use a trumpet mouthpiece. Now, how does all of this work? Well, we're going to find out here. So I'm going to be taking a play on this so you can hear a little bit of an action, and then we're going to talk about the experience afterward. I'm going to be playing this mouthpiece today on a Shire's Model A trumpet. First heard about this hybrid mouthpiece concept, I have to admit I was more than a little intrigued. I, of course, have been a huge fan of Wycliffe Gordon going back to my formative years, in high school and college. At that time, of course, all the great work that he did with Wynton Marsalis, and then all of the great solo work. And again, I think, a lot of people agree he's become a major force in the, not just jazz trombone world, just the jazz world in general. And of course, a fantastic player. And so when I heard that, oh yeah, Wycliffe has got this hybrid mouthpiece, a trombone, type of cup, going to a trumpet shank, I said, okay, let's see what's going on here. And I've been keeping an eye on this for a while. The original design he had for this was done with a company out in California called Shanson Music. And I heard about these mouthpieces. I've talked with a couple folks who had played them and, had some different reactions to them. But when I found out that he had recently worked with Pickett Brass down in Kentucky, who we are very lucky to work with, when I found out that they had a version as well that they developed with Wycliffe, I said, all right, now I need to get this in the shop here. So took a little bit. We've got it in here. So one of the things, by the way, quick side note, you might see a bunch of trumpets behind me. A lot of the trombone folks we work with don't realize that besides having our trombone shop over here, we actually do have a full trumpet shop as well, with the same idea, trying to be a one place resource for all of our trumpet players from student up to pro. And as part of my duties in our brass shop in general, of course, I end up working with trumpet players. Occasionally we get trumpets in where I said, boy, I'd really like to have a little bit of an idea how this plays, but I can't play trumpet mouthpieces. I can make a sound. I can sound like a decent beginner on trumpet, not much beyond that. It just doesn't work for me. But, for a while I thought, well, I have some trumpet register on my trombone gear. I can play up there to an extent, but it's the mouthpiece that doesn't work for me. And so I think that was, probably one of the inspirations why Wycliffe went with this as well. He said, I can do this on trombone. Let's see if we can adapt it to trumpet. So in order to do that, they had to do some really interesting things. So the Wybrid mouthpiece here, first off is, overall it's like a 12C. So it comes in just about 24.5 millimeters for the cup width. Has a very standard, I would say, frankly, a little bit wider rim width, which oftentimes we see with our smaller mouthpieces. So I would say the overall, shape, consistency, I'd put somewhere between like a Bach and maybe like a Schilke rim, slightly flat. But what's really interesting is what happens after the rim. So there we go down to a very, very shallow cup. Really, I've never played a trombone mouthpiece. The closest version I would have to this would be the Parduba mouthpieces. So these are the mouthpieces where they have a very shallow outer cup, and then they go down to a very, much deeper V-shaped middle of the cup. I would say the outer rim cup of the Parduba is very close to the entire cup of this. And then, of course, it goes down to really, I would call it a true trumpet backbore. Honestly, looking at, I haven't had a chance to pull a drill bit and check, but I would have to guess that they're probably trumpet mouthpieces that have a wider backbore and throat than this does. So right away, we're taking, this very interesting concept. We're taking a lot of this air and really trying to shove it into a small diameter throat and backbore very, very quickly there. And to be honest, my first initial experience with the mouthpiece was less than great. Now, to be fair, part of that was I was not necessarily playing on the greatest instruments, and I think that plays a role here. So when I first tried this mouthpiece with a couple of intermediate level instruments, it played fine. I certainly had range up to like a C, middle of the staff for trumpet. Now, keep in mind, for trombone, that C, middle of the staff, is going to be an octave feel, like an octave higher for us. So there, we're talking like an eighth partial B flat. And I've got to tell you, all the way through, it feels like that. The mouthpiece is not making the actual range up there really any easier. It feels like we're playing high B flats and C's and D's and E flats and F's and even G's up there a little bit, getting into the 12th, 13th partial. It feels like it. So if it's something where it's like, well, I'm developing my upper range, I'm really hoping that this is, this kind of mouthpiece would help to significantly extend my range on trumpet. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily count on that. I think it's a little bit more like what we experience with alto trombone. Sometimes I work with folks who it's kind of the same thought process. Well, I want to play alto because I want to make my upper register easier. A lot of alto players will tell you that's not always their experience. My typical rule of thumb is if you can't play it on tenor, there's a good shot it may not work on alto as well. There's only so much with the physics of the instrument that's going to affect what actually needs to happen with the vibration of the embouchure. This is very much the same way. So it feels like I'm playing highs, Fs, and Gs, but it's working. But on some of these intermediate level instruments, I struggled a little bit. I could get up to, like a E, in the middle of the staff for trumpet, which again, think about is going to be like our 10th partial D. Beyond that, it didn't work terribly well. I was really fighting it. The sound was really, really crispy. There was a lot of noise in it. Didn't want to center properly. But when we had this S.E. Shires Model A come in, and again, for those of you in the trombone community who aren't familiar with the Shires trumpets, these have very much the same opinion in the trumpet world as our trombones do. Great playing instruments. The Model A, I would suspect, is probably their most popular model. So when we had this come in, and I said, I want to check it out anyway, I thought this was a great opportunity to actually try this mouthpiece with a real pro horn. It made a huge difference. All of the things, frankly, a lot of stuff I would expect moving from intermediate to a professional trombone, I found. Better, clearer sound, better control. It's slotted, locked in place better access to the upper range. I was able to get, up to the A above the staff on trumpet, which is, again, for us, is again like a 13th partial G, it was working for me. And so, again, it demonstrated like, okay, well, obviously we know the trumpet makes a difference with this. And so, again, for me, I think that definitely played a role in all of this, having a good trumpet to work with it. But it worked. But again, there are a few caveats with this. First off, because of how shallow the cup is, there were times I did feel myself bottoming out a little bit. Now, we don't encounter this a whole lot in the trombone world. This is more of a conversation with trumpets, for example. And so bottoming out just means that your lips, the aperture is actually touching the bottom of the cup. And there were certainly certain, particular times that I found that right away, especially when I was trying to do like articulate playing. And I think that's something I could probably learn to work around. It's like, okay, here's how I have to kind of, keep my shape a little bit different to avoid that happening. So that was certainly the case. Again, the other thing is that if that range isn't happening for you on trombone, there's only so much I think you're going to be able to do. Again, for a lot of folks, they're very comfortable up to a high B flat. And so on trumpet, that's going to give you a good octave and a half register. But I suspect that, as you're getting above that, you do have to have a certain amount of aperture strength and control in that extreme upper register on trombone in order to get this to work for you. But with all of that said, again, I was skeptical. It works. It's something where I said, if I wouldn't want to play a gig on it, especially not for a long time. I don't want to be a trumpet player. I'm very content being a trombone player. But I think for times, again, when I have instruments coming into the shop, I say, I'd really like to try this model and try to get a little bit of an idea. It makes me feel like I might be able to at least draw a little bit out of what's going on with it. Now, I know if any trumpet players are watching this, they're probably going to heartily disagree with me and say that you're not going to get the realistic experience, a trumpet experience trying to play with this mouthpiece. And, frankly, I'm inclined to agree with them to an extent. I'm not claiming that I'm going to be able to get it to play like a really great trumpet player will. But I do think it will give me a little bit of access that, frankly, I just wouldn't have had at all with a trumpet mouthpiece. So very, very interesting concept. And again, I think very, very well designed, well thought out by Mr. Gordon and, of course, by Pickett Brass, who always make fantastic mouthpieces. And so I got a really, really interesting collaboration, and I'm really glad we had a chance to check it out. So I hope you enjoyed the video as well. So if you have any thoughts, questions about what we talked about, if you have any experience with this mouthpiece, please leave them below in the comments. We'd love to have that shared with our viewing community. And if you haven't already done so, think about giving this video a thumbs up. Think about subscribing to our channel so that you can see all of the other videos I hope to continue producing for you, being a part of our community in our channel here. And of course, you can always check us out on Facebook and Instagram. So thank you very much as always for watching.